Romans 11 verses 11 to 15. The redemption hidden in rejection, Israel's fall, the Gentiles' fullness, and the hope of resurrection. It is one of the most staggering reversals in redemptive history. What looked like the final fall of Israel becomes the fertile ground of Gentile salvation. What seemed like covenant tragedy becomes global triumph. But Paul insists, this is no accident, no detour in God's plan. The unbelief of Israel is neither total nor final. Instead, it becomes a doorway, a strange and sovereign design whereby grace spills beyond its expected bounds. Through Israel's misstep, mercy reaches the Gentiles. Through Gentile inclusion, a spark is lit in Israel's heart. And through their future return, a new dawn shall break, life from the dead. In Romans 11 verses 11 to 15, Paul unfolds God's sovereign design in three movements. Israel's fall becomes the Gentiles' gain. Gentile mercy stirs Israel's jealousy, and Israel's restoration ignites resurrection hope. First, Israel's fall becomes the Gentiles' gain, verse 11. So I ask, have they stumbled so as to fall? By no means. But through their stumbling salvation has come to the Gentiles. Paul opens with a jarring question. Has Israel stumbled into permanent ruin? The verb, taio, to stumble, implies a misstep, not a final collapse. And Paul's answer rings out with vehement denial. God forbid. The term for trespass, paraptoma, speaks not of finality but of deviation. And yet, God uses this deviation as the hinge on which the door of salvation swings open to the nations. As John Murray observes, this is not divine improvisation but divine orchestration, a sovereign design where Israel's loss becomes the world's gain. What the covenant people rejected through unbelief, the Gentiles receive freely through faith in the Messiah. Their rejection leads to reconciliation, katalage. Their casting away, apobole, becomes the world's reception. It is grace rising from the ruins. And here we see the paradox of providence. God does not merely permit human failure. He repurposes it. The fall of Israel becomes the seedbed of global grace. The gospel moves forward not in spite of rejection, but through it. Second, Gentile mercy provokes Israel's jealousy, verses 13 and 14. I glorify my ministry in order to make my own people jealous, and thus save some of them. Paul's vision is not static. He does not see Gentile salvation as the end of the story. Rather, it is a provocation, parazaloo, a divine stirring meant to awaken Israel's desire. This is no petty envy, but a sacred longing. It is the ache of a people once near, now watching others rejoice in the promises they abandoned. As Paul magnifies his Gentile ministry, his motive is deeply personal, that I might save some of them. This is the apostle's pastoral heart. Election does not cool his zeal, it fuels it. Divine sovereignty does not silence his longing, it ignites it. Paul knows that God will call his elect, and yet he labors, provokes, and pleads. The gospel lived out among Gentile believers, marked by joy, peace, and adoption, becomes a mirror held before Israel. And in that mirror, Paul hopes they will see not only what they've lost, but what they might still regain. This dynamic, where mercy seen in others stirs longing in the heart, is not limited to first-century Jews. It is the divine strategy still at work today. Third, Israel's restoration brings resurrection hope, verse 15. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? Here Paul's argument rises to its eschatological summit. If Israel's rejection brought reconciliation to the world, what greater glory awaits in their acceptance? Perslapsis. His answer is breathtaking. Life from the dead. Pulses with resurrection imagery. Some see in this phrase a spiritual revival, others a literal resurrection, a climactic event at the end of the age. Likely, Paul has both in view. This is not just personal renewal, it is redemptive reversal. Thomas Schreiner and Murray point to this as a future mass conversion of ethnic Israel, a covenantal reawakening that will signal the next great movement in redemptive history. The branches will be grafted in again. The tree will bloom. Israel is not abandoned. The covenant is not revoked. The fall was never final. And when they are received again, the world will tremble not in judgment, but in joy. Reflections for today, pierced by the pattern of mercy. First, where have you mistaken divine silence for divine absence? Israel's stumble was not the end of their story, though to many it seemed like it. So too, we often interpret delayed restoration of marriages, ministries, prodigals, or even nations as abandonment. But what if God is working in the shadows, weaving a mercy too wide for our timelines? What if the closed doors and missteps in your life are not graves, but gateways? Paul calls us to see providence not as the absence of pain, but as the presence of purpose, where even rejection becomes redirection. Have you grown weary of hoping where God has merely paused? Second, has your life lost its power to provoke? Paul believed that Gentile joy could awaken Jewish jealousy, not the envy of possessions, but the longing for presence. And so he lived in such a way that others could taste the promises he carried. But many today live unprovoking lives, quietly assimilated, safely privatized, gospel truths muted beneath cultural conformity. If an unbelieving friend spent a week with you, would they envy your peace, your prayerfulness, your worship, your forgiveness, your trust in the unseen? Or would they see only a sanitized version of themselves with church clothes? The gospel should not just be preached, it should be felt in us as a life worth longing for. Third, where have you given up praying for resurrection? Paul saw Israel not as a hopeless case, but as a waiting miracle, barren branches ready for grafting, dead bones waiting for breath. He lived with eschatological expectancy, refusing to settle for what he saw. But some of us have stopped praying for certain people or places because we've already written the ending. A son who mocks your faith, a church that's grown cold, a nation gripped by pride. And yet the Spirit still whispers, life from the dead. Could it be that our spiritual fatigue is not from laboring too long, but from hoping too little? What would change if you believed again that God raises what we bury? Conclusion: the mercy that moves history. In Romans 11 verses 11 to 15, Paul lifts our eyes to see that history is not drifting, it is directed. Israel's fall was not the end, but the beginning of a wider mercy. Gentile salvation is not the final word, but the middle stanza. And the final verse will rise with Israel's return, the dead awakened, and the world rejoicing. So let us not grow weary. Let us not lose sight. The same mercy that saved you is still at work, in nations, in prodigals, in the hardest of hearts. And when God writes the next chapter, it will shake the world with resurrection joy. Amen.